and got a $48 million tax credit. I said, wait a minute, to me, it made no sense. The whole ranch, 500,000 acres, was for sale for $24 million. That's roughly $5 million for 100,000 acres. You follow me?
Good deal.
Suddenly, it's times 10. And as I was looking at the ranch to see whether or not to consider repurchasing, this had to do with what the value of the ranch would be. The whole ranch, the remaining 400,000 acres, was brought to me in 1986 at $50 million. In other words, I could buy 4 times what the government got several years earlier for $2 million more.
Understood.
Than you follow me?
Understood.
So I couldn't make it make sense. So under the Freedom of Information Act, and completely in accordance with all the laws, rules, and regulations, I had a lawyer dig the facts up, and I analyzed the facts in my decision of whether or not to buy the ranch, and I never bought the ranch.
But you did assemble the documents.
For that purpose.
Did you not turn them over to the Washington Post afterwards?
They came to see me and asked about this transaction. And asked to see the documents, and I said, here.
They asked about it independently.
But you're missing a point. This has to do with whether or not the land was appraised fairly and whether or not they got a tax credit or a tax deduction. This does not mean then Vice President Bush was in the middle of getting this benefit for them. I was looking at it as a business transaction. For example, they could have gotten this tax deduction without his knowledge or awareness.
Do you think they did?
I don't know how it happened.
Do you think he had a hand in that considerable tax deduction?
I have no idea.
Did you expect the Washington Post to explore that possibility? Was that the reason why you gave them the documents?
They came down and were interested in this transaction. I explained the transaction to them, and then they never did anything with it.
You talked about the politics and what you say are the motivations behind this. You have no doubt seen the way the Republican camp is now anxious to portray you, characterize you as somebody who is hung up on investigation, anxious to look behind everyone's door. Let's show you a brief clip of the Vice President's statement.
Okay.
And then
we're wasting time.
Well,
we'll do that, but the point is, this is the propaganda. Let's talk about the facts and the time we have.
Let's at least allow the propaganda even time, if you want to
Hitler's propaganda chief would be proud of what we're about to see.
Ross Perot, having the IRS, the FBI, and the CIA under his control, who would be investigated next?
Well, first you create a false premise. You do it very carefully over a 90-day period. Then you create a critical mass and bring out the things that have caused us to be here together. Then you get the Vice President to make a statement like that that has nothing to do with the facts. If you look at my whole life, I have meticulously followed the law. I have meticulously obeyed the Constitution. Anybody that knows me or knows anything about me would understand that I would never even consider violating the great principles that this country is founded on. This is nothing but politics at its worst and lowest.
Let's see if we can separate fact from fiction.
Great.
No one has ever said you did anything illegal or unethical. Your friend and campaign chairman, Mr. Luce, was on this program yesterday, told me he had never hired a private investigator on your behalf. I read a quote from you in U.S. News and World Report that you had hired such an investigator 3 or 4 times.
But
which is it? I'm just...
Well, excuse me. I didn't... It's neither. The point is, Mr. Luce, acting as my attorney, has never hired a private investigator. So he's telling the truth.
Okay.
I don't have to go through him to hire a private investigator, right? Now then, on 3 or 4 occasions in my whole business career, I have had to get a private investigator. Now, that is not a pattern. When you consider this had to do with people who were doing improper things, like taking money, so on and so forth, where we had to get to the bottom of it and make sure that it was stopped. Another one had to do with a person who had rented a house from me, who was having fights in the front yard, totally disrupting the neighborhood, and not paying his rent. We went through the court system, and under Texas law, had him evicted. And under Texas law, after a person like that, who is creating problems like that, is evicted, you can go in to inspect your house. Inspect is quite different from search. We were allowed to go in and inspect to make sure he was not damaging the house in the few days he had to move out. We did that. To give you a sense of who this person was, he's now in jail somewhere. He's a person that never should have been in the house. Fights in the front yard, the worst kinds of problems that we had while he was there.
What about your relationship with Special Detective James Beatty?
I don't have a relationship, and he is not a detective. Now, James Beatty is a police officer, or was a police officer in Arlington, Virginia, and I don't have a special relationship with him. See, this is miscasting thing.
Okay, that's why we're here.
I know, but this got covered yesterday, Brian, so now, you know, listen real close.
Okay.
This is a police officer, not a private investigator.
Okay, he's an undercover police officer.
Undercover police officer. He had this information. People said he wanted to talk to me, asked me to call him, set up a meeting. I asked him if he wanted to see me. He came to my hotel room. He presented this information, and here's what I did with it. I gave it to the appropriate law enforcement authorities, walked away from it, and that's it. Now, that is not chasing down information on someone. That's having someone bring it to you, and I handed it to the FBI, and that's the end of that.
Let me show you why that may not be the end of it, because here's James Beatty's account of just one sec. Here's James Beatty's account of that same conversation and how it came and how it came about.
Wait just a minute. We can't agree.
One second.
How old is this account?
They're going to re-rack the tape right now.
How old is it?
This tape was recent. This tape was recent. If you're asking me the exact date, I do not have the exact date. It was taken this year.
No, I called him. So I think the main thing.
Let's roll.
We're about to show the people.
Let's roll it and listen together.
Let's see what we got.
He had called me up and said that he had learned that I had information about a party that he was interested in, and would I be willing to talk to him about it.
Did you call him up?
I just told you that I was told that he wanted to talk to me. I then called, and I wasn't even sure what about. And I said, did you want to talk to me? And he said, yes, I have something I want to talk to. He came over to my hotel, gave me this file, and I turned it over to the FBI. Now, let me ask you and your audience, what would a law-abiding citizen do? This had sworn deposition from the Presidential Crime Commission. It had direct ties in with organized crime. Now, see, I am not a law enforcement authority or specialist, what have you. I turned it over to the FBI. First, I took it to the Vice President, because I was working with him on a project. And I said, this was given to me. What should I do with it? And after a long pause, he says, I guess you should turn it over to the FBI. And I did. Now, let me ask you this. What would you have done, and what should I have done? Throw it in the wastebasket?
I'm not the one running for president.
No, that's not the point. What is the...
Well, it is the point, because what I would have done is irrelevant.
You're a law-abiding citizen. I'm a law-abiding citizen. I'm given this. I turned it over to the law enforcement agencies. I'm not running around like Sherlock Holmes trying to do anything.
Okay, then let me give a little bit of a backdrop to this, all right? Because we're talking about this citizen.
Let's go on to the next one.
No, we ought to name...
stay with this one.
No, let's stay with this one. We ought to name the citizen, okay? The citizen was a Defense Department official, Richard Armitage, right?
That's correct.
All right. The reports are, the claims are, that you were feuding with him and were, in fact, trying to spread the idea that he was not working as hard as he otherwise might have been to repatriate American MIAs, in part because he had been and was being personally compromised by a relationship he had with a young Vietnamese girl. Is that true?
No.
Are any parts of it true?
Almost none.
Okay.
Let's take what is true.
All right.
Let's take what is true. I'd never met him. Everything I knew about him you could put on the head of a pin, okay? And this came in. Now, interestingly enough, I'm a pretty simple fellow. Right after he came in, he was in the Defense Department. I was in the Defense Department going through the MIA files at the request of Vice President Bush. He had me, this shows the relationship that he had me doing this study, which I didn't want to do, and but they stayed after me to do it, and I finally did it. So the first thing I did after I got the file is talk to him. I said, look, I was given this. I don't know anything about it. But if this is true, it's very compromising to you, and you have a very sensitive position, which has nothing to do with MIAs. He had a very sensitive position in the Defense Department, and I said, I just want to make sure you understand this is floating around. If it's true, these are very serious allegations. Then I asked the Vice President what to do with it. He said to turn it over to the FBI, and the rest is history.
Did you not keep a photograph of Mr. Armitage and the young lady in your possession, in your office safe?
No, I had a copy of the file that the police officer gave me.
Did you keep a copy of the photograph in the safe?
That was included in the file.
Okay, because I also want to show you another clip. This isn't a film festival going on here, but I want to show you a clip of Washington Post reporter David Remick, and what he said when he talked to you about this. Okay, let's roll it.
And the subject turned to POW MIA, and all of a sudden Perot bounced out of his chair, went into his office safe, and came out with a photograph. And in the photograph was a high-ranking Pentagon official seated next to a Vietnamese woman. That's it. It wasn't a very compromising photograph at all. But Perot explained that this woman was somehow a very sleazy character, was involved in criminal activity of some sort, and that therefore the Pentagon official was to be discredited simply by sitting next to her.
Well, it's not a correct description of the photograph. The thing he fails to mention is he brought this up. I didn't bring it up in terms of this part of the conversation. He raised the issue on this individual. I told him I didn't want to talk about it on the record at all. He agreed to go completely off the record. I discussed it with him off the record, and he has completely miscast that particular photograph, which that photograph by itself is not significant. But the documented file, including sworn testimony from the Presidential Crime Commission, is what is significant. And my concern, as it was given to me, was a person with these possible contacts with the underworld, because we're talking about organized crime here. Now, that has nothing to do with MIAs. It could be compromised from a security point of view, and so I handed it over to law enforcement. So if you want to see, the question is, did I discuss this with David Remnick at his initiative off the record? The answer is yes.
There are other things to talk to you about besides these kinds of charges. We're going to try to talk about them for a few more minutes as this morning proceeds with Ross Perot. We're back in just a moment. This is Today on NBC. Back now, 7:30 on a Wednesday morning. I'm Bryant Gumbel here with Katie Perot. Margaret Larson's over the news desk. We'll be getting to her in just a little bit. But first, back to Mr. Ross Perot, who's kindly consented to stay with us for about another 8 minutes. And I thank you for that. And during the break, we were talking about what you said, the silly tactics of the Republican Party and focusing on your personality. In taking up their stand, I said that perhaps they are doing so because there are policies to focus on. So let's try to talk about that if we could.
Could I make one point?
Sure,
They're not
ahead.
focusing on my personality. They're creating a new personality that doesn't exist. That's a very important point. If they wanted to focus on my personality, that'd be fair. They're creating a new personality very carefully, and then this week they have a massive rollout for the American people, and it's not working because it's not true, and the phone banks are alive and going crazy with anger over what they're trying to do.
The responsibility for that, those dirty tricks as you characterize and those flights of fancy, you think it lies in the Oval Office?
There's no other place for it to be.
President Bush is to blame.
He is in charge of the whole process. That party does not run out there out of control.
Is this part of his promise to do anything to get elected?
I don't know. I don't know, but it's not working. See, here's the good news. The good news is this will hurt them and hurt them badly, because the American people are just furious with this little theater program they run in Washington. American people want action. They want something to happen in this country. Washington is a master of deception, cover-up, and deceit. That's where we are.
All right. Let's talk about what might happen if enough people put Ross Perot's name down on November 3rd. On May the 5th, you told Newspaper Publishers Association, I believe, when asked about reducing the deficit, see me in 60 days. Calendar says the 60 days run out on July the 4th. Can we expect a detailed deficit reduction plan at that time?
You can expect a detailed deficit reduction plan when I'm ready. I am an engineer. I follow the old carpenter's rule. Measure twice, cut once. I'm not going to send out a bunch of buzzwords like you normally see. And while you are pinning me down on this, and not you, I say you collectively.
I'm just using your words. You said see me in 60 days.
See me in 60 days. If I'm ready, we'll do it. If I'm not ready, I'll say I'm going to take a few more days to do
What, see
it.
you in another 30?
Well, I'll tell you then. I'll be closer. You see what I mean? I'll be closer to the end of it. But can we agree that it's not in the interest of the American people to just run it out to meet a schedule if it's not done? That doesn't make sense. Now, while we're being so persistent here, could someone just ask the president once? Is he going to have one? Is that asking too much?
I'd love to have the opportunity
But my
to
point
ask him.
Shouldn't we have a reasonably balanced deck here, or should we have a double standard? One, if you are in the office, and if you are squarely responsible for helping build up $4 trillion in debt, a $400 billion deficit this year, a recession, millions of people out of work, a declining job base, shouldn't there be some accountability for the person in the office? Or do Governor Clinton and I have to bear the total responsibility for putting together plans to fix the mess that he and his associates created?
Okay, so far it's Governor Clinton alone bearing the responsibility, in all fairness. He's come out with his detailed plan.
How long ago?
Last week.
Did anybody ever press him for it before it came out?
Well, people had asked
I
him
don't
throughout
think
the
so.
primary,
No.
throughout the primary
I'm the only-
season.
See, you have to understand, I am the odd duck in the race. I have this unthinkable, unspeakable, improper thing happening where people are putting me on the ballot in all 50 states. This is supposed to be controlled out of Washington by two political parties that send a blast at the American people to say, here's what you're supposed to think, here's what you're supposed to do, and here's how you're supposed to vote. You follow me? I'm coming a different way, so suddenly I have to be treated in a much harsher environment, which is fine, because it's all Mickey Mouse. But I can't resist. I can't resist just bringing up, don't you think we ought to hold everybody to the same standard?
I think that's a great idea.
Okay.
We'll get to George Bush's plan
When
when
he
it comes.
has a detailed plan, I'll feel tremendous pressure to have
All
mine.
right. In the interim, Bill Clinton has at least come forward and said, here's my plan. What'd you think of it?
Well, I haven't really had a chance to study
Oh,
it.
come on. You saw the headlines
I
of
saw-
it.
But that's all I saw, and I think that's about all there is the headlines.
He says he can cut the deficit in half in 4 years. Can you do better?
When I'm ready, I'll talk about it.
You think you can do better?
But I'm not going to... See, this is too serious just to speculate about. We will come forward with a plan. We will go over it in great detail. We will explain it to the American people. Anything you get ready to do... See, I'm not interested in winning the election. I'm interested in solving the problem. I'm interested in serving the people. I don't serve the people if I come up with half-baked theatrical sound bites made for television to attract attention. I will have a plan, and when I have it, we'll discuss
But,
it.
Mr. Perot, allow me this. That in itself has become a soundbite. I don't want to speak in sound bites. Nobody's asking you to speak in sound bites here. If you wanted to lay your plan out for the next hour and a half, we clear the deck.
All right, fine. What you're pressing me to do is give you the kind of short headline plan that is now in front of you from Governor Clinton. I want to have a much more detailed plan, and I want it to be a plan that will work, and most importantly, it's got to be a plan that when you go to the American people with the plan, you can build a consensus that they're willing to do it. Now, that's a complicated undertaking. It's just simple to the American people. If you want action, this is what we have to do. If you just want more sound, you know, I won't say sound. If you want more little,
Say SOTs.
if you want more political promises that nobody keeps, then you know, I can give you that right off the top of my head right now. But you don't want that, and I won't try to give it to you.
Okay. We've spent a lot of time talking about George Bush. Let me talk about Bill Clinton with you just a little bit. His headlines of late have centered around his spat, disagreement, split, whatever phrase you'd like to use, with the Reverend Jesse Jackson over the comments of a rapper named Sister Soldier. Do you think Clinton was right in criticizing those comments?
Well, it's easy to sit on the sideline and create somebody who's in the game. Now, he was there speaking that day. He was there as a guest to the Rainbow Coalition. I personally would not have gotten into what I consider extraneous things. I would have talked about the real issues that face the country, the real issues of coming together, the real issues of building a united team. These are the see, but now, again, I guess once you start down the Murphy Brown Trail, if you got enough handlers around you, they say, gee, you need to have a counterpoint. I don't know how all this came up, I don't even think it's worth talking about.
Well, here's the point.
Here's what's wrong with politics. This is what's wrong with politics. All we do is waste time on Murphy Brown or Sister Soldier.
No, I'm not trying to waste time on Murphy Brown or Sister Soldier. In fact, she's almost irrelevant to the process. I guess the question is, does a presidential candidate have a responsibility to confront what he perceives as remarks that exacerbate racial animosity, no matter who says them and no matter the audience?
I would suggest it would be more productive to talk about bringing all of the different races together into a united team, because if we don't, we cannot win as a country. And in the time you have before a group like the Rainbow Coalition, I would have spent every minute on that. When you start using examples like that to make a point, I think if you want to make that point, it would be, and again, I hate to second guess somebody that's in the middle of, in the middle of activity when I'm sitting here on the sidelines, but it's better to talk about the issue and not to take an example, whether it's Murphy Brown, Sister Soldier, or whoever, and just take the issue head on in terms of stress between the races, because there's a strong consensus there. Everybody in the Rainbow Coalition would have stood up and cheered about coming together as a united team. And that's what Governor Clinton was talking about.
In fairness to Governor Clinton, he said much of that in his address before the Rainbow Coalition.
Again, I'm sure that in retrospect he would just as soon not have the distraction of the example he used. But that's his decision, his business.
Okay, we've about 2 minutes left. Let me get to two matters. I know you discount polls. You don't like them, don't believe in them, don't think they should be the gauge of anything you do. On the other hand, those same polls that charted your rapid rise now suggest that the number of registered voters who think negatively of you has doubled in the past 6